to see all your faces, even if virtually. All right, and then next, there we go. So Niall, can I ask you to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I'll ask everybody else, make sure to keep yourselves on mute and follow along with Niall. Niall, so you'll need to unmute yourself.
Right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Niall. All right, so let's see what we have in store today from the talented Michael and Stu.
Well, this is kind of a fun one. I had to ask, we needed a suggestion. So we came up with a suggestion via David Rounds, and I just texted him and asked him, why did he pick this song? It was all about the turmoil in the 60s and the race riots and Vietnam War, et cetera, et cetera. And so he picked on me, of course, to begin this. And then I gave it to Stu, and here's Stu with, he's all ready, I think.
Here we go.
1, 2, 3. Something happened in here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware. Well, it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. This battle line's being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds, getting so much resistance from behind. We gotta stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the men come and take you away. You gotta stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Thank you very much, Stu and Michael. Very, very creative. Steve Neff even said you should put out an album. All right, so our meeting front line. Oh, sorry, thought for the day. Sorry, Randy. I got ahead of myself. So Randy Schlintz, please share your thought for the day.
All right, thank you, Carolyn. Good afternoon, Carolyn, Rotarians and guests, especially our guests. Well, as you all know, we've been experiencing a really very unusual year so far. First came the pandemic, instituting masks and social distancing and closing all non-essential businesses. And then came the extraordinary thunder and lightning storms, igniting massive complex fires, burning thousands of acres and hundreds of homes. And then, with other wildfires contributing, smoke settled in over us with unhealthy air, limiting all our outdoor activities. So many freedoms of choice were eliminated in a relatively short period of time. In reflecting on all this, I realized how much I'd taken for granted, and with very little or no thankfulness. In this new reality, I'm appreciating and thankful for the small things each day brings. couple days ago, was just sitting outside, even though the air wasn't all that great. And I heard the kids next door playing, which was really kind of nice. Yesterday, we got a surprise masked and social distance visit from our grandson. And today, I'm very thankful for a more smoke-free blue sky. In the not too distant future, what I'm really looking forward to most is just getting together with family and friends, unmasked, with no social distancing, and with a few hugs thrown in. So have a great day and be thankful.
Thank you very much, Randy. I think we all need that reminder to have an attitude of gratitude. So today's meeting front line. Thank you, Lynn Monica, for being the greeter today. Joel Swanson is our Spur reporter. Alan put together our AV, even though he's not able to join us today. So Dawn is running the show and will also be the Spur publisher. Jeff, as always, is our Zoom host, and David, our Zoom chat monitor. So first, do we have any visiting Rotarians? I know we have a number of guests. Do we have any visiting Rotarians? All right, not seeing any hands raised or, and then I know we have a number of guests. So first I will start by just saying a hello to Jean Otto, who's joined us from Spokane, Washington. Jean, if you'd like to take yourself off mute and say hello.
Hello, everybody. I got confused there for a minute. I'm thinking, I'm not a visiting Rotarian, but I am definitely a guest, I guess, at this point. So, but thank you for introducing me, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you, Jean. And then now, Susan or Brian, would you like to introduce your guests?
Oh, I thought I would do maybe. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay, well, we'll have a sort of cheering group for Susan's talk, and it's led by our son, Will, who's joining us from Santa Cruz with his wife, Terry. And then from Benicia, our son-in-law, Tom Stanton is joining us. Our grandson, Owen Carlson, is joining us. And very especially, we have Jackie Clark joining us from Maine. And Jackie isn't strictly part of our family, but we all consider her to be. And you'll find out a little bit more about who she is in the course of Susan's talk. Anyway, it gives me great pleasure to introduce them all to us.
Thank you very much, Brian, and welcome all to the Mayall family and friends that are like family. Do we have any other guests who are with us today? Nope.
I'd like
all
to
right.
introduce this is Lynn Sepp. I'd like to introduce my wife, Joan, publisher of The Independent and president of the Performing Arts Center.
Welcome, Joan. Thank you for joining us today. All right, any other guests? All right, so I'm going to have to update this photo. I'm getting pretty close to finishing all the streets in Livermore, but the bad air quality has kind of slowed me down the past couple weeks. All right, and so a photo for my next one. There we go. So this is my hashtag Mask Up for Livermore. So many of you may know that the city of Livermore, along with the school district and LARPD, are doing a campaign right now, Mask Up for Livermore. I'm sure you all know about that. So if you happen to have photos, use your social media platforms, use the hashtag Mask Up for Livermore. My friend Susan, who's a quilter, made this particular mask for me, a different mask for every occasion. right, the next slide. There we go. So now I'm pleased to welcome TJ Gil-Martin to give us a member talk, the man in the hat. Thank you, TJ. TJ, you're on mute. Take yourself off mute. And everybody else, I recommend you use speaker view while TJ is talking.
My personal and professional life facts are my wife, Barbara, the most beloved person in my entire extended family, son Benjamin, international architect living in New York City with wife Tabitha and baby son Max, son Aiden, cancer drug research biologist living in Philadelphia with wife Elaine and teens Isabella and Ian. I have a PhD in engineering physics and 34 years of work on laser systems, first at MIT Lincoln Laboratory in Boston, and then here at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, National Laboratory. I retired in 2001. But I want to focus on my Rotary and Rotary-like history. My story themes are working with kids, international adventures, and friendships. In 1965, when I was 25, I spent 4 months of Peace Corps-like time in Peru, doing school and park construction, teaching English and learning a little bit of Spanish. It was a Nino year with one ecological, biblical scale plague after another. But still, it was a happy and deeply learningful time for me. If it were up to me, all students worldwide would spend significant time in other countries, of course to broaden themselves, but principally for them to learn by contrast the strengths and weaknesses of their own countries. When I joined Rotary in 1990, I focused on the International Student Exchange Program, taking kids into our house from Poland, Russia, India, Brazil, Kyrgyzstan, Spain, Japan, and France. We're still friends with Polish Agnieszka Wasilewska, Agnes, Aga, then a 17-year-old four-language girl, now a teacher who lives in London with her husband and her 3 children, who themselves are now at university. In 1988, I joined the board of the Student Education Loan Fund, SELF, a partly Rotary-founded organization which loans money interest-free to Livermore post-high school students. And I'm still on the board after 32 years. We've now loaned $1 million in over 700 student loans. This Rotary Club's foundation and members have long supported SELF. In 1992, I walked with 2 non-Rotarian friends the 20-mile Ohlone Trail from Del Valle to Sunol Regional Park. It was April, the height of the spring wildflower season. It was paradise. Next year, I invited Rotarians and a dozen came with me. Then we started offering dinner at Gil-Martin House and a hot tub afterwards. That got 30 people. We peaked at 70 people for dinner one of the 7 years that we did this. It became known as the Long Walk. Then we switched to a San Francisco walk inspired by John Shirley, who started doing this with our exchange students. From Pier 39 after breakfast at the Eagle Cafe, through the marina and Crissy Field, over the Golden Gate Bridge, lunch and horseshoes at the Coast Guard station, ice cream in Sausalito, ferry back to San Francisco, dinner in Chinatown, and then back to Pier 39 and home. About 14 miles a full day. John Shirley, Tall Paul, Hagop, Ed Clark, and I ran this for 5 or 6 years. Charging $200 a person, we paid all the expenses and we cleared $5,000 or $6,000 for Rotary each year. In 1999, Tall Paul took 4 of us Rotarians and 3 Brits to visit the Nepalese children in Kathmandu, and then to hike at 16,000 feet across the Chinese-Tibet Mount Everest Preserve and up to 18,000 feet on the north side of Mount Everest. In the middle 1990s, I was on the board and then the president of the Rotarian Foundation of Livermore, refocusing the foundation's giving on youth, education, and community well-being projects. In 2001, Hector Timurian and I brought the top science program to Livermore, recruiting retired scientists and engineers to volunteer in all of the Livermore primary and middle schools to help the science teachers. I was at Mendenhall for 7 years, partnering first with Bob Cowan's science teacher wife, Karen, and then with his teacher daughter, Katie. The kids called Tuesday, TJ Tuesday. This program is still going strong. In 2003, Barbara and I went to the International Rotary Convention in Brisbane, Australia, also visiting Sydney and the Great Barrier Reef. We went again in 2005 to the 100th anniversary Rotary Convention in the founding city of Chicago. My Rotary President year began in 2003. Our club motto for the year was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is, we wanted our club projects to improve people's lives, to create options for them, and to make them and us happy. In addition to our club's usual spate of programs and the San Francisco Walk, we did 3 special projects. We led the project that built 45 2-room houses with plumbing and electricity for 300 people in Navsari, India. In 2007, Barbara, Henry Fankhauser, and I visited the project and met the people living in them. They thought 85-year-old, 85-pound, bent over Henry was Mother Teresa, even though she was a chain smoker. Bless her memory. We also did a friendship exchange with Berlin, Germany Rotary. 6 couples from our club, including Barbara and me, the Cowans and Rungis. We 6 couples stayed with a prince, a CEO of Allianz, a technological millionaire art collector, 2 architects, and a food chemist, Gunther, my host, who came later with his wife Renata to visit us in Livermore. Treated like royalty in Berlin, we then went to Leipzig, Dresden, Munich, where we visited a past exchange student, Annetta Lenz, and then on to the walled city of Rothenburg and Heidelberg and Frankfurt. Our own German-speaking Rotarian, Angelika, helped arrange all of this. And finally, we started the dictionary project. It's been 17 years. All the kids in all the grades through the high school have now received this beautiful gift of words. Carol Howell has done this with the help of Tom Heineman and Sheila Fagliano, who is always there at every school. Plus, probably every member of this club at some time, and the Morning Club, and the Hindu Cultural and Community Center, who have partnered with us from the first year. Now I'm doing Ready at Junction, and I love those kids. They remind me of my family when I was a boy, living in a small house with limited resources. In 2007, I joined the board of the directors of the Livermore Valley Opera and am still there, very proud to be so. I washed pots and pans for Open Heart Kitchen once a month for 12 years until last year. During breaks, I would sit with the guests and learn their stories. You and I don't know people whose lives are so hard. I've been doing the orientation for new members for 8 years with the help of 8 other past presidents. What did I get out of all of this? I have traveled now to over 50 countries and spent 700 days outside of the United States. I've worked with young people continuously and still am. And friends, a continuous interaction with all of you from every interest, every philosophy, challenging and fun, and willing and able to serve others. So that's my lifetime Rotary story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, TJ.
Thank you.
And lots of applause there for you, which you can't hear. I think you exemplify what it means to be a Rotarian. We're very fortunate to have you in our club, and you've also outlined for us and told by your adventures how Rotary opens opportunities for those locally and throughout the world. Thank you. So as I shared a couple weeks ago, there is no crab feed, no rodeo parade, but we are still philanthropic, and so we'll need to raise funds. Tune in next week, and that you'll find out how. So I would like to now invite Ken Perrine to tell us about our program on September 30th, giving you a couple week advance notice. Ken.
Thanks, Carolyn. So while I think all our speakers this year have been great, on September 30th, I am very excited to welcome Dr. Ira Helfand of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Dr. Helfand is the recipient of the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize and co-president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, the founding partner of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which was the recipient of the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize. That's the Nobel Peace Prize, not once, but twice. We are really looking forward to this program, and I'd like to give a special shout out and thanks to Norm Bregman for making the introductions to set this up. But if you would like to invite a friend to hear this presentation, mark your calendars. We think this is going to be a great program to bring a guest.
Thank you very much, Ken. So September 30th, invite a friend. That would be a great opportunity to show somebody else what Rotary is about. Here's another opportunity. If you recall last week, I had shared that this is a great opportunity to see what other Rotary clubs are doing. And so the area for Rotary clubs, Pleasanton North Rotary, is hosting a speaker on October 1st at 5 p.m., 100,000 tons of leadership. And so Herman Selinsky, retired Vice Admiral for the United States Navy, will be speaking. Registration is required, so make sure to use, this will be in the Spur, so you'll be able to have access to the link, or if you go on the Pleasanton North Rotary website, I'm sure the link is there as well. It will be limited to the first 100 guests, so make sure to reserve your spot early. And next week, we will have Dr. Joel Perot, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, the president and CEO of the Oakland Zoo. So you're welcome to invite guests next week as well, so we can hear all of the updates from the zoo and how the animals and the zoo are doing during this very tumultuous time. And so now, without further ado, I invite and welcome our own Susan Mail. Again, I remind you to toggle to the speaker view during Susan's presentation. Susan.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Susan, thank you.
Good. Okay. Anyway, it seems a little sad that on the first really sunny day, you should be having to come and listen to me, because I'm sure most of you would rather be outside. But anyway, here I am. And first of all, I just wanted to say what fun it was to listen to TJ, because he reminded me so much of those hikes along the Ohlone Trail, which several of our family used to come on. And of course, the ones also across the Golden Gate Bridge started by John, which were fantastic fun too. Anyway, that was just a sidelight. This is a story. It's basically my story, I suppose. And it's about one aspect of our first 10 years in the United States, from 1962 to 1972. Those of you who were alive then, and there are a few who weren't, will remember, of course, and everyone does really, that during that time, the country went through quite a few tumultuous issues. There was a Cuban Missile Crisis 8 weeks after our arrival, the assassination of JFK, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy, the Civil Rights Movement and all the reactions to that, the ferment in education, the women's movement, the Vietnam War, the protests and marches, hippies, communes, the Beatles, the Stones, Chubby Checkers, Peter, Paul and Mary, open marriage, drugs, Joan Baez, free love, Captain Beefheart, just to remind my son. At the beginning, women wore hats and gloves in downtown Philadelphia. Men had brush cuts and they wore suits. By the end, it was miniskirts, beards, and long hair. And all this time, we were living peacefully in the pleasant Philadelphia suburb known as the Main Line. The title referred to the railroad out of Philadelphia to the west and the small towns and big old estates along it. Now the big estates were being carved up into new housing. Townsend Circle was one of the new streets. Just 12 houses weren't all built at that time on a small estate owned by the Townsends, who still lived in the big house next door. Now, who's we? We were privileged immigrants. When we crossed the border from Ontario, Canada, with our 3 children and a cat, we had no trouble. We were white, English speaking, well educated, weren't likely to be a burden on the state, and we didn't have a tinge of communism in our records. We drove straight on to Philadelphia in our old station wagon. We were both 29. We'd grown up in England. We both had degrees from Cambridge University, where we met. We had 3 children, our son, Will, born in England, aged 7, and 2 daughters, Chris and Catherine, 5 and 2, born in Canada. And soon we'd have our first American, Alice, born in Philadelphia, and now lives in Livermore. We'd emigrated to Canada in 1956, basically just wanting a change and being a bit adventurous, not really thinking long term. Brian got his MD and went through his internship there. We were very happy there. But it was time to move on. And Brian received a postdoc fellowship to do research at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia. The Wistar is an old scientific institute founded explicitly for white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, which we found rather funny because by the time we got there, the Wistar was full of just people from just about anywhere else. They were from all around the world. So we started off with a very international set of friends, as well as our social life on Townsend Circle, which was as American as one could get. I want to emphasize that neither of us had any strong political opinions at that time. Even though my degree was in history, we'd learned very little American history at that time. It was, even at Cambridge, it was pretty bad. And I really felt that was useless. I could have read more on my own beforehand if we'd really known we were coming here, but we'd only decided fairly recently. I read the news and I listened to the radio, watched some TV, and there was always plenty about America, but my knowledge was really superficial. From the first, though, I found America exciting. Everyone seemed so incredibly busy. Everyone was involved in something. Lots of good works going on. There was a local election coming on, and I found myself picking a favorite candidate. I was sort of feeling involved and wishing I could vote, but that couldn't happen, of course, at that time. I still wanted to get involved, and I tried in several ways, but this is not the story of any particular involvement that I had. I loved Philadelphia. I would have been happy to stay in Philadelphia, but it really wasn't practical. So we bought a house out in the suburbs. We would be on Townsend Circle, where really the loudest sounds were children's voices playing and an occasional car. But I think I learned more there in a way than anywhere else. It was there that we were first affected, if somewhat minimally, by one of the main issues of our first 10 years. So on to Townsend Circle. It was a very pretty area. It was almost rural. At the bottom of the road, there were some woods on the left. Opposite our road, there was a golf course where the children and their friends trespassed in summer, and we all went sledding in the winter. There was another big old house down the lane with mowed lawns and big trees, and there was a meadow to the side and behind our house. Behind that meadow, there was a group of small houses. They were small, but they were different from ours. Our children all walked across the meadow to go to school, to catch the school bus anyway. And our houses were all pretty large. They were partially sort of custom built. We had half-acre lots. They were all lawns and tall trees with no fences between them. So it was the easiest possible way to get to know people. So we made friends very, very rapidly, especially me, because Brian was settling into his job at the Worcester, and it was I was the one who was settling into Townsend Circle. The children met up with each other immediately. The neighbors all had children, mostly 10 downwards. Also a few teenagers, which was very useful because we needed them since we were also trying to get to know the people from the Worcester. At first, there were 17 children in all, and more moved in later. 2 more families moved in soon after us. It was rather a leave it to beaver existence. We had, on summer nights, we'd all be sitting around the circle, watching the children play kick the can or collect fireflies. We drank beer together, and it was fun on those sultry evenings. And we'd have parties, especially in summer. On one of them, I remember our Episcopal minister, Howard, on the circle. We weren't Episcopalian by then, but he was our neighbor, bought a bowl of artillery punch, and I still don't know what was in it, but it was absolutely lethal. I drank a very small amount because I was pregnant again and promptly fell off the picnic bench. The poor man felt so guilty that he retired and went home. And I still think it was the bench rather than the punch. In those days at home with 4 children, I got to know everyone on the circle, or all the women on the circle, really well, before, and better than I've ever known any neighbors before or since. Everyone was really amazingly friendly, even more than in Canada. I drank coffee or wine in every house, and they all came back to ours. We talked about the missile crisis, which happened very soon after we arrived. I don't know that anyone who didn't experience it could imagine how terrifying that was. It coincided with Will and Chris's first day at their new school, Chris's first day in kindergarten. When I dropped them off at school, I wondered whether I'd ever see them again. I'd experienced war and bombing, and I dreaded war more than anything else. President Kennedy handled it really well, and the US withdrew its rockets. Our neighbors had differing opinions on Kennedy, but they were quite open about them. They were not so worried about war as I was. I was curious about all aspects of America, and they were about me. We were the only foreigners on the street, and none of them had traveled much, even in the USA. We were different, though we didn't want to be, but we were all white, of European ancestry. When President Kennedy was killed, I heard the news on the radio. I was alone in the house, apart from baby Alice, and a workman who was finishing off some work on a window. His response to the news was, somebody didn't like him. So I picked up Alice and dashed next door to my friend Ruth, probably the person I spent most time with. She had a baby about Alice's age. We dumped our children on the carpet, cried together, and drank some wine. She was a die-hard Republican, deeply mistrusted the Kennedys, but she was devastated by the murder of her president, a young man with children. Ruth and her husband, Carl, were very different from us in many ways. Carl was a manager at a paint factory and a rather silent type, nice, but not particularly friendly. But Ruth and I became true friends and still are. They were probably a bit different from the others on the street too. They were both strict Catholics and very conservative. Ruth was of Irish ancestry and Carl was German. But even Ruth was slowly changing her views. They'd wanted a large family, went ahead and had 4 children. But Ruth was a hemophilia carrier. Their eldest was a sweet, friendly little boy and very athletic when we first met him. But that changed, and he spent an awful lot of time on crutches. Ruth told me her feelings about contraception had changed, but Carl's hadn't, and they had 1 more little boy, fortunately okay. She was interested in everything, never been to college, but read a lot. She had very firm opinions, often diametrically opposed to mine, and we talked politics a lot, occasionally not speaking to each other if disagreements got too strong. They'd really struggled to buy this house, which was the largest and the prettiest on the circle. They were very proud of it and intended to stay there forever. Our children soon discovered that the small settlement across the meadow was an old Black community. Their children joined ours on the school bus. It had probably been there as long as the old estates, because that's what it was there for. The people in Mount Pleasant, as it's called, had all worked on the old estates. Some neighbors seemed uncomfortable with this, with the fact that these families were there. Their children came over and played occasionally. June, the minister's wife, commented that she was glad their yard actually had a fence between them and the meadow. Yet we'd been told that her husband had been transferred to the diocese office because his parish had been unhappy with his attempt to bring Black parishioners for communion. Previously, they had been left in the back until all the white people had taken part. It didn't seem to fit, and we didn't understand. We'd thought, if we thought at all, discrimination was something in the South. But the people of Mount Pleasant seemed pleasant, peaceful people. And our children were bringing back tales from school that disturbed us. Chris came home telling us that her second grade teacher, a great teacher in most ways, apparently regularly tied some of the black boys to their chairs if they misbehaved. Were they really bad? I asked Chris. All boys are bad, she said, now into her anti-boy stage. Soon after, the school districts were redrawn, and the children on our street went to the beautiful new school a little way away. This became one of the top-ranking public schools in the country, and almost all white. The Mount Pleasant kids stayed in the old school. We were hearing daily about the sit-ins and marches for civil rights. One day, our cleaning lady, a young black woman from West Philadelphia, arrived with tears in her eyes. It was the day 4 little girls were killed in the Birmingham church bombing. Why do they hate us so much? She said. How could I answer? I mentioned Ruth's pride in her house. One day she told me she was terrified of black people moving in. Everyone on our street had taken a risk when they bought bigger, better houses there. With Mount Pleasant next door, they knew that their houses were already less valuable than similar houses elsewhere. They feared that their property values would drop if black families moved in. Already the newest houses were sitting empty. Nobody came to look at them. Everyone was worried. And then, of course, it happened. The Fair Housing Act passed, and immediately, almost next day, the realtors were on our street, bringing people finally able to fulfill their own lifelong dream. 2 houses were sold right away to black families, 2 more somewhat later. Ours, one was next to us, another was on the other side of Ruth. Our new next door neighbors were a tall, elegant couple, Waldron and Marjorie. Waldron was a GE executive. Marjorie had been a teenage model and was featured on the front page of the Girl Scouts magazine. They owned an apartment building downtown and had 1 small son, about Alice's age. I did my usual thing, took some cookies and made friends. We found we had plenty in common. Brian and Waldron got on well together. So did Marjorie and I. She became another neighbor with whom I chatted in the afternoons over coffee. We all went to the symphony concerts downtown together. The other couple were older, Marshall and Mildred, a retired couple who'd been middle school principals in Philadelphia. They were friendly and charming. They'd grown up in Mississippi and told us they'd like to go back there if things changed because it's so much friendlier. The later buyers had children too, and all our kids played together as before. There was no thought of protest or unpleasantness. Waldron and one of our newer white neighbors had trained hunting dogs and went hunting together. But beyond that, our new neighbors and old didn't mix, with 2 exceptions. I continued to visit with all of them. It was almost the same. But there were things we didn't talk about. And our neighborhood parties ended. Eventually, the new families were all just what the neighbors might have wanted if they'd been white. The exceptions were Ruth and her new neighbors, Marshall and Mildred. Initially, she'd have nothing to do with them. Then one day, she left the brakes off in her car, and the car rolled downhill into the house next door. Obviously, an apology was necessary, and it was graciously received. Then there were some repairs to discuss. So, both of those families discovered they had more in common than anyone else on the circle. They were both politically and in other ways very conservative. Both of them supported the Vietnam War. They were both devoted to their churches. By the time we left, they were spending every Christmas Eve together and attending family gatherings. And this continued. When Marshall died, Ruth and Carl were the only white couple at his huge funeral. In my coffees with Marjorie, she sometimes mentioned times when she'd been seen as someone different than she was. When they lived in an apartment, she said people coming to their door always assumed she was the maid. She laughed when she told us that when they bought their own apartment building, the tenants were shocked that they were Black. And Waldron told us that when he went to give a talk on his work in aerospace research, the receptionist assumed he was the chauffeur. I started going with Marjorie sometimes when she needed a white person to follow her as she checked out a rental unit to see if they'd rent to her and obey the Fair Housing Act. If she was turned down, I was meant to see if the landlord would rent to me. As it happened, we never came across a wicked landlord, and I was rather relieved. But something happened. I'd been teaching by then at a school I'd come to love, a highly academic, but very warm and thoughtful place. It was a long-established girls' boarding school, and much like the one that I'd gone to in England, but much better and much more humane. It had just accepted its first Black students, who all came on scholarships. I knew every one of the faculty, and I'd never known teachers who cared so deeply about their students. They were my friends. Soon after that, Martin Luther King was killed. I was chair of the faculty senate, as we called it at the time, and we invited Marjorie to come and tell us about possible problems the girls might face and what we could do to help. And Marjorie, much more militant by then, gave a blistering talk, mostly about how misguided and ignorant we do-gooders were. I was hurt and upset and confronted her at home. She tried to explain, but I didn't understand. Maybe I didn't really listen. And there was a barrier between us after that. Now I understand more. I didn't then, and I disagree in some ways even now. I was also worried about my faculty friends. Soon after that, I got a clue from one of my Black students. She was from a fairly deprived home and there on a scholarship like the others. She was having problems with essay writing and had nearly failed a test. I had her in for an interview. I suggested things she could do, and she became a little tearful, which always affects me. I offered to let her take the test again, something I would not have done for my white students. She was indignant. No, she said, I'll try harder. I can do it. And I could understand that. All she wanted was to be treated the same way as anyone else. Soon after that, Brian's whole division left the University of Pennsylvania and moved to the lab here. And we moved to Livermore. We found a smaller house with a big yard. As new citizens, we finally could vote. And on our first few months, I walked a precinct for McGovern. And you know how that went. Some of you may remember. We've remembered good friends with Ruth, still arguing, and with all of June and Howard's children, one of whom is watching today. We lost touch with Waldron and Marjorie, but their son Wayne caught up with us on Facebook. The circle remains as integrated as it was, and Ruth lives in the same house, now 93 and still driving. Our children tell us that nobody they know lived on the street like that. And that's my story.
Thank you very much, Susan, for that beautiful story. I think you're just showing us the nature of humanity and the importance of looking at each other as fellow humans. Thank you for that. And so now I'd like to open it up to questions for Susan. So Pat Coyle, you have a question.
So Susan, thank you so much for sharing that. I have to write, is this another installment in your memoirs?
It was started that way, Pat.
Oh, we
yes.
look forward to seeing it in print. It's just delightful to hear your stories. They're just wonderful, Susan.
Well, it's longer. It would be a bit longer, needless to say. Yeah.
Sure.
But this is enough.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
All right. And do we have anybody else with that has a question for Susan or a comment you want to share? Glenn Kubiak.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Lump in my throat. Do you know what happened to the student who you offered to have take the test again?
Oh, I thought that question would come. I'm proud to say that all of our students got into some of the best colleges. One of mine went to Harvard. She was one of the first women there. And they did not go because of their race or their scholarship. They went because they were darn good students. But they were probably seen from then after as being scholarship girls because that happened. Yes.
Thank you.
Anyway, they did. And afterwards, I follow them. They have great careers. So.
Susan, it's Chuck. So you didn't tell us about the great bookstore that you started here in Livermore. Good enough.
That was my next action of, well, activity of, yes, my next teaching, I should say, apart from teaching at Chabot for a while. Yes. No, anyway, no, I loved my bookstore, and it was what made me feel part of Livermore. It was a wonderful way to get to know the community and so many people. It was when Dave Lowell came to the bookstore, which he did very frequently, selling advertising for the Independent, that he kept pestering me to join Rotary, which after 10 years I did.
Great, thank you.
Other questions for Susan? And Susan, you may have just said it then. So how long, or what of those stories that from your time in Philadelphia also mirrored or was the same from who you encountered in the bookstore when you were at Good Enough, when you owned Good Enough?
No, I think in the bookstore we had just about, I could have found sort of counterparts to just about everyone. It's amazing, when I started it, first of all, people said a bookstore will never succeed in Livermore because there had been one or two failed bookstores before. And I thought that's ridiculous. This town needs a bookstore. As it turned, and then if they didn't say that, they said, oh, well, the lab people will buy books. But initially it was nearly all the lab wives that bought books. And then I did get a lot of lab customers too. But I had customers of every possible sort. It was terrific. And it was how it was wonderful also to get to know the business community at that time, because this was something that I'd never been able to do. So it was very rewarding in every way. I met the settlers that way, of course. I met, well, so many of you in Livermore I met that way. I met Chuck before through church, but but anyway, yes, so many people.
And TJ, you have a question for Susan.
Susan, did you find the people of Livermore to be the same or different from the people of Philadelphia?
No, well, I was just saying, I don't think that the people of, it was a somewhat narrow, I mean, obviously Townsend Circle was a pretty narrow section. But the main line was mostly rather like that, from wealthier to poorer, but mostly a bit like that, I think. But I think Livermore was more, I've been in the Midwest quite a bit. I would say it's a bit more like the Midwest. More, at that point, it seemed more isolated, apart from many of the lab people. Yes, it was, well, it had been a farming community and railroad community. It was different. And there was quite a big division between the lab and the town still at that point. So that was different.
And Susan, Jean Otto has a question for you.
Yeah,
Jean.
Hi, Jean.
When you moved to Livermore, did you attend the rodeos? And would that have been
Yes.
the first rodeos?
Oh, of course, yes. We did everything we could, yes. I think it's obviously the most local sort of thing that we could do. There were a whole lot of things that were different. We discovered that in Livermore, when you were invited out to dinner, you actually you were meant to arrive on time. And we never ever, we weren't used to that. In Philadelphia, everyone seemed to come about half an hour late. So that caused some problems, but yes. Yeah, I can't think of too much else. Yeah. Anyway, we did, and we took foreigners to the rodeo too. Mm-hmm.
And did you have an opportunity to have some of your friends from Philadelphia come visit you here in Livermore?
Yeah, yes, we were too young and the house was too full, so we couldn't really, and nobody could afford to travel so much then when we were in Philadelphia. So we were pretty much cut off from home. But yes, here, I have relatives in Denmark, relatives in Spain, friends and relatives in the Netherlands and the New Zealand, and they've all visited here, and all their young people visit us, and that's wonderful. So it's terrific to see how much the young people of every country are the same now. Okay.
All right, thank you, Susan. Any other final comments for Susan? I'm not seeing everybody's, I'm trying to look through the
Susan,
screen.
it's Gordon here. Susan's been very modest about her education. To go to Cambridge or Oxford, you're in the top 99 percentile. There's only one way to get to university in those days. There were no scholarships. What did you study at Cambridge and how many were female in your class? I think it was mathematics, wasn't it?
No, it was history.
History. Oh.
Yeah, and the history, I must say, was not my sort of history. It was almost entirely almost entirely political history. And I was really interested in social and economic history, which is what I've focused on in all my reading and everything ever since.
Explains that.
Carolyn, call on Carol Garrich.
Okay, Carol and then Jean.
Carol?
Carol, did you have a question?
You're muted.
Am I muted now? Am I okay?
No, now we can hear you.
Okay. Susan, I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, the first suburb north of Chicago, and it was a very diverse community in terms of cultural and racial. We weren't particularly well integrated in terms of economics. There were poor parts of town, but I always considered that a rather special experience, and I wondered, did your children, or do they, consider that that was your time in Philadelphia with an integrated neighborhood? Did they realize that was rather special and did they cherish it?
I think they recognized it very soon when they came to Livermore because it was different here, yes. Mm-hmm. And I think they certainly have ever since. But of course, two of them, I think, two of them are watching at the moment.
Oh, that's right.
At least one.
They can give me their impressions, yes.
And yeah, no, they certainly think it's very different. Yes. And
Well, thank you very much again, Susan, for sharing that very inspiring story and for me, the inspiration of really getting to know each other, and that kind of piggybacks on what TJ shared in his member talk of getting to know individuals, and that's how we build connections, and that's how we strengthen communities. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm sure if you have any last questions for Susan, can you stay on for a couple minutes? But after that, I want to let everybody know, respect your time. It's 1:30. Thank you to all of our guests who joined us today to hear Susan's story. Thank you, Joan. Thank you very much to all of the members of Susan and Brian's family, whether by blood or marriage or choice. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you.
So this concludes another meeting of the Rotary Club of Livermore. See you all next week, if not before.
Carolyn, who is the Spur reporter?
Joel. Joel Swanson is today's Spur reporter.
Thank you.
Just a comment from down here in the deep south. I don't see any prejudice in Florida, and about a third of the population is black here, and about a third is Puerto Rican, a third white, and really nice people.
Good.
What about the Cuban population where you are, Steve?
Well, the Cubans are down in Miami more. We have the Puerto Ricans here.
Got it. Okay.
One advantage of Puerto Ricans is they speak English.
Ah, there you go.
Susan, it's Sheila. You know, being born and raised in Livermore, as a little girl, I think I went to school with two black families back in the 60s.
Watson the Hughes.
Yes. The one family that moved into town, it was like in 63, their parents were transferred here to the lab. Their last name was Lacey, Anthony and Sharon, if I remember correctly. And their dad was in the military. But I was never, I don't know, I have to thank my parents and maybe my, circle of friends. I never knew a difference between color. We had a lot of Hispanic friends, and I was never taught that. So I'm forever grateful.
Yeah.
Because they were just a classmate of mine.
Yes.
And I really have to say that, there was probably a lot of adults that felt differently, but they never imposed that on us growing up or in the schools. And we were all treated the same through my school experience. I never experienced, like you said, when the teachers would do things like that. That would something that I would remember, and I never saw that. So I guess I'm very lucky.
I think it depends a lot on how many black children there were, and I've certainly heard that from other people too. And I think it's quite natural because then, they're just accepted, of course. And I do think it was different in big cities, and certainly probably in a lot of country places too, but it depending on the mix, but
well, your talk was very inspirational. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susan. And I will echo what Pat said. It will be fun to see this in writing or continuing. You're a wonderful storyteller and weaving in history to your personal story to make it jump off the page. Or in this case, into our ears.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Very nice to hear you live.
Thank you. Thanks, Dominic.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. What a treat. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye, all.
Yo.
Bye, everyone.
Good to see everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Jeff. You're really doing a great job.
You bet. Thanks. Yeah, there's always something I'm learning every day.
The instant request. Why don't we do breakout rooms?
Yeah.
Very, very good with that.
Well, I mean, it's not bad. It just, I can always kind of set it up, but then, quickly try to figure out who's doing what, letting somebody else in, helping the greeter. I'm trying to find a good way for the greeter to be able to actually greet people, because there is so much crosstalk. The moment we go into a breakout room, if they don't know how to jump to breakout rooms, they really can't even.
Yeah, the greeter.
I don't know.
Yeah. So did it work from your end? Do a lot of people still stay because they didn't know how to click on join the room?
Yeah. And what happens is then it just dumps them into whatever room the host is in.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
gotcha.
and so who was ever in my room, all of a sudden we ended up with 12 to 15 people, and their other rooms had 3 or 4.
Right.
And then when it has a join, I can quickly move off to the side and just start clicking them on rooms to join. But then they still have to physically activate going to whatever that room is.
Right. So you kind of need to almost stay out, or somebody has to stay out and send the other people to the rooms and still collect. So.
There's one observation, and maybe because I came in very later than usual today, that I would offer, and that's I thought it was the crosstalk, as Jeff refers to it, really interfered with Lynn's ability to be the greeter. It was actually kind of uncomfortable, and I thought that I think that it would be good if we could all reinforce, just as now people really have established and accepted the discipline of muting themselves when you start the formal program at 12:30. Might be good to just remind people that the greeter has a real opportunity to be front and center, and we need to give it to them. Yeah.
I don't have a really good solution in that one. I mean,
yeah,
I agree. Even on this one, I had everybody muted before they even came on.
Yeah.
So it was like an automatic, so they had to physically unmute. But then.
And I recognize that I
tend
to jump in way more than my proportional share probably, so I'm probably as guilty as anybody. Maybe we could just articulate that at the beginning of the meetings, and as the greeter is getting started, and just see what happens.
Yeah. So maybe, and it's. So I'll think about being able to be conscious of that between Jeff and I together, so that we can remind people of that, so that they can go back. And I think we'll probably do when we do the club assembly next month, that will be a time to do breakout rooms, and maybe we can do it in a more controlled fashion. We'll do it in the formal part of the meeting. And I'll kind of have some stuff planned for that. I don't know what it is yet, but have something planned for that in discussion where everybody can kind of, as they're part of the meeting, get the sense of how a breakout room works.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Because, I mean, it really does eliminate a lot of the crosstalk. Everybody get a word in edgewise for sure.
Right. And I think that's what some people want to do. So.
Yeah, there's a fine balance between the spontaneity and then but also giving the greeter some time to actually do their job and get known.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I think making them a co-host, at least they get a. Okay. Well.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Take care. Good meeting, Carolyn. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll have everything out within a couple of hours.
Yeah, I see that blue sky behind you, Glenn.
Yes. Oh my God. Yesterday was the first day we actually saw the sun actually set.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you're down there on the beach and want to see the sunset. Yeah.
Just as opposed to it's darker than it was at noon.
Right.
Yeah. I can't
I'm going to have
think of
to try to get outside.
What's that?
I was going to say, I'm going to have to try to get outside today. Sorry, Jeff.
Carolyn. Okay. No. Mine was even less. I was going to ask Glenn if you've been able to get out to that golf course and see that Piper play in the evening.
No, we've had guests that haven't been staying with us, but no, we haven't taken advantage of it. Thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah. No.
There was no sunset.
We tried to do it, but then Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting and start getting the
okay
downloads going.
Great job.
All right.
Okay.
You bet. Okay. I'll see you next week. Okay. Bye-bye.